good evening. I'm your host, Wilton Jackson, reporter and professor of journalism and media studies at Jackson State University. Welcome to our election night coverage. Tonight, we'll be providing you with up-to-date information and results regarding the 2023 gubernatorial and legislative elections in Mississippi. Throughout our special program, we'll hear from political analysts, elected officials, community organizers, JSU students and alumni about highly contested races, the issues, and the future of this state. We're live from JSU TV. You can also tune in on WJSU FM, the SIP.FM, and our department YouTube channel. Who will fill Mississippi's statewide seats? Stay tuned to find out. And tonight, we're watching the following races. For governor, Democrat Brandon Presley versus Republican Tate Reeves. Lieutenant Governor, Democrat D. Ryan Grover versus Republican Delbert Hoseman. Secretary of State, Democrat Ty Pinkins versus Republican Michael Watson. Attorney General, Democrat Greta Kemp Martin versus Republican Lynn Fitch. State Auditor, Democrat Larry Bradford versus Republican Shad White. State Treasurer, Democrat Addie Green versus Republican David McRae. Commissioner of Agriculture and Commerce, Democrat Robert Bradford Sr. versus Republican Andy Gibson. Commissioner of Insurance, Democrat Bruce Burton versus Republican Mike Cheney. Most polls have closed statewide except for Hinds County. A judge ruled in Hinds County the polls can stay open until 8 p.m. due to several voting precincts running out of ballots. But experts predict this election will bring out a large number of voters in Mississippi. JSU TV's Desmond Matthews take a look at voter activity right here on campus and in the metro area.
Tuesday's general election brought several people out to the polls.
And I'm expecting at least 500 to 600 people to come. In the first hour, we already had 100, which made it look like it's going to be a good look.
There are 110 voting precincts in Hinds County and over 149,000 registered voters. Getting all of those places set up and getting volunteers can be a hassle, but Election Commission Chair Yvonne Harris makes it look easy.
As soon as one election is over, we have started prepping for the next election because there are certain things that we have to get out of the bins. You see here, we have to clear those out because we use them each time there is an election, which means the general election or special election.
Some precincts are busier than others. Precinct 49 is on the campus of Jackson State University, and traffic is known to be slower on campus. Yet there were still a few people that came in just after the doors opened on Tuesday morning. The police training center on St. Charles Street also did not see a large number of voters coming in the door. But just a few blocks away at Precinct 58, steady traffic flowed through the Pearl Street Church.
Excited to see people coming out. My parents were very active in the civil rights movement and in voter registration in their day. Of course, they all are gone. However, it's been kind of lackadaisical in the last few elections other than presidential elections. So I'm excited to see that people care and that they want to make a change and know that the way to make a change is through the ballot box by coming out to vote.
Teresa King was a poll worker at Precinct 58 that saw hundreds of voters cast their ballots and even heard some share their beliefs, like Mary Brookins.
Any area should have a right to vote, should have access to a good education, should have access to health care. Those are the minimal things that people need. So let's get out and vote and get people in who are sensitive to the needs of every citizen.
Many eyes are on the governor's race this election. Governor Tate Reeves has been in office since 2020 and feels that what he has already implemented should allow him a second term.
Mississippi has the lowest unemployment rate in state history. It's an undeniable fact, and my opponent doesn't want to talk about that. The fact is that Mississippi has more people working today than at any time in state history, and my opponent doesn't want to talk about that either. We gave the largest teacher pay raise. Our educational achievement results are unprecedented in state history, and Mississippi has momentum to believe.
While his challenger Brandon Presley looks to get in office and make an immediate impact.
Majority in the House and the Senate today that are definitely would pass Medicaid expansion, and I think it's a matter of leadership at the governor's office. I would take the step first day to order the Division of Medicaid to file for the Section 1115 waiver. Tate Reeves obviously doesn't even know what that is, but that is something the governor could do on first day. That's exactly what I would do.
Reporting for JSU TV, I'm Desmond Matthews.
Mississippi voters have also taken to social media to discuss the 2023 election. In our social media newsroom, integrated marketing communication students Darian Raymore and Elijah Kareem discuss conversations surrounding this year's election and more.
Thank you, Wilton. Social media is such a huge part of our everyday communication practices. A recent Pew Research study found that half of U.S. adults get news from social media at least some of the time. So its role during the election is even more important. You know, we turn to social media to gauge voter sentiments by looking at conversations, posts, and reshares surrounding the general election in the state of Mississippi. You know, one of the most engaging and interesting conversations on Instagram amongst both liberal and conservative voters was talking about where Republicans really stand in this year's election. For example, in one Instagram post with nearly 9,000 likes and over 900 shares, one liberal blogger pointed to the fact that many Republicans didn't actually vote for Governor Tate Reeves. And last week we saw that NBC News talked about Mississippi state elections and how it could be historic to flip the state blue this year. If we remember in 2019, Reeves only won by a 5-point margin. So we now get to see that the black voter surge in the Metro Jackson area really might affect the turnout of this year's election. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, as a Mississippian, I'm excited to see history possibly being made tonight on this election. But what's more interesting than that is seeing how Republicans are shifting more to Brandon Presley over Governor Tate Reeves. You know, a recent study posted by Mississippi Today and Siena College back in June showed that 1 out of every 5 Republican primary voters would likely vote for Brandon Presley over Governor Tate Reeves. That's kind of interesting. And then we see on social media how they're pulling more towards Brandon Presley, and a Republican called out so-called Republicans and their loyalty to Governor Tate Reeves on how they're flipping the ballots this year. And then we see the gubernatorial debate and how there's not really a winner for that debate, but social media has really just crowned Brandon Presley the winner of that debate. So what's your take on that?
You know, I think it's really interesting when we look at the debate this year and see that a lot of it really was insults more than policy and what they plan to do for the state of Mississippi, because I feel like a lot of people on social media talked about how they really would have loved to get more of the policy, because even in their ads we saw it was more so what can we say about you more than what can we say about the things we want to bring to the state of Mississippi as a whole. So it kind of was disheartening to see that this was really the only, you know, gubernatorial debate that the state of Mississippi was able to have, and that's really how it went down.
Well, you know, I can't really blame anybody but the two running for this position, because they took that platform and ran with it. In social media, they only saw what was presented to them. So when you have people pulling out receipts saying, well, you did X, Y, and Z, it's not really fair to your citizens, your working class citizens who have to sit and watch this and worry about the policies that are being made.
Yeah, and even to that point, you know, a lot of times, and what people were saying, just even about the receipts aspect of it, it was kind of like, okay, well, here you are on stage talking about what you think that this candidate did instead of what you plan to do if you were able to get that position. And I think that that's where a lot of people kind of were upset, because even as working class, you know, citizens of the state, you want to know what somebody wants to bring to the table and what ideas they have to make the state better, not how much dirt can you get on a person or what can you really say all the time. So it's really interesting to see that in the feedback from social media.
Well, you know, the receipts will be coming in after the polls are closed. We'll be back with more in the next segment to look at live conversations that are happening on social media. Stay tuned.
Thanks, gentlemen. Joining me first tonight is Democrat Senator Solly B. Norwood of Hinds County. Senator Norwood's District 28 includes Jackson State University. He was elected to his seat in 2013. Senator Norwood, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So we're going to just kind of jump right in. When you think about this year's elections and Mississippi's gubernatorial elections, what are your general thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's time for a change, and I'm obviously I'm a Democrat, and I support Commissioner Presley. I've known him for about 20 plus years, and I think he has the right mindset and temperament to lead us into the future.
Absolutely. And when you think about the work that Brandon Presley has done, are there any things that really stand out that you really like about what he's been able to do in this state? Absolutely.
I mean, I just love the fact that he has stressed the need and recognized the need to expand Medicaid. That's extremely important, because we have so many vulnerable citizens that lack health care, that are working and don't qualify for Medicaid. So that's going to be extremely important. It's also important that we, his take on funding for historical black colleges and universities, and especially helping to Jackson State in the area that I represent. And we have some priorities that I look forward to working with him. Housing is one of the main components that we have lacked, and we definitely need my colleagues at the legislature, get them to support it, and we hope to get Governor Presley, if you will, to support it as well.
So when you look at, District 28, some of our viewers may not know all of the specific places in District 28. What all does District 28 consist of, and what are some of the things that you're looking to implement and change going forward in District 28?
Well, District 28, with the redistricting, takes me all the way to, I go to Clinton, go down to Byron, and back across, and it's, each Senate district represents about 65,000 citizens within the boundaries. One thing that really caught my attention, and I started working on it last year, and that's grandparents. Grandparents raising their grandchildren and not getting the real support as a foster parent would get. And I introduced some legislation last year, didn't go anywhere. I've met with State Department and also met with some grandparents to talk about how they can help me to craft the legislation to hopefully that I can get a majority, get it out of committee and get it to the floor and get a favorable vote on that. So that's really big. As I stated, housing in Jackson State, housing is extremely important. And there's no need for us not to appropriate funds that would help Jackson State to address the housing issue. And I got children coming to Jackson State. I would want, and more parents now want their children coming into college to have at least that first year on campus, and I think that's extremely important. Also address the issues of beefing up safety and security. You want to make sure that that's we have access to resources, and one thing that I think that is unfair to our institution is that we build buildings, and our buildings last such short time. We tear those buildings down, but you've invested, countless dollars into those buildings, and that's something that we have to look at and hold the individuals, the architects and engineers accountable and responsible for the contracts that are let to them, and they build buildings, and the lifespan is so short.
Absolutely, and considering some of the issues that you just mentioned, how important are these elections this year are going to be a deciding factor in some of the legislation that you've mentioned that you tried to put in over the last year and even kind of moving into the next legislative session in 2024?
Well, I think unfortunately we here in our state, we see the value of legislation is placed on a Republican or Democrat rather than what is good public policy. I think good public policy is good public policy. It doesn't matter who the author is, if it's a Republican or a Democrat. And I think Brandon Presley is the person that can lead that charge to encourage and support bipartisanship across in both the House and the Senate, based on his relationship and based on his willing to work with, work with both parties, based on the merit of the proposals rather than on the party of the person that's presenting the proposal.
Absolutely, and you mentioned in some of those issues, safety being a big issue, especially within Jackson, but around the Jackson State area, and you're familiar with everything that's happened around the campus within the last couple of weeks. How do we get the ball rolling, changing on things in regards to that safety around the Jackson State area?
Well, I think that resources is a big problem at both Jackson State and the city of Jackson. And one of part of the conversation, and Brendan has indicated that he wants to sit down with both the city and the county and talk about those issues. And certainly Jackson State would be involved. Certainly the legislators would be involved. So I think it all begins with the conversation. You had a conversation about the needs. I'm not going to give you something and then try to make it fit. Let's discuss what the specific needs are. Then let's get the resources and work together rather than, putting something together and forcing it down your throat. We talk about 1020. 1020 was a piece of legislation that could have very well had some good merit to it, but when you're talking about replacing judges, elected judges with appointed judges, and when you're talking about creating separate courts, there were a lot in there that did not work for us. But I like to see the City of Jackson, Capitol Police, and the Hines County Sheriff Department work together throughout the county to make safety one of our premier hallmarks, and that would make, if citizens feel safe, they're going to have to spend more. I just got a call tonight, and they extended the voting hours to 8 o'clock. Well, it's extremely dark. In some places, it's darker than normal because the lights are not working. And you got voters that's leaving the poll now, and I encourage all those voters to, stay, be patient till 8 o'clock. But if they're concerned about their safety, then you can't really force that issue with them. So we have some challenges, and I think we can address those challenges and solve those challenges working together.
Absolutely, and we've talked about some of your challenges within the district, but I want to ask you this: what would you consider some of the successes of District 28?
Well, District 28, I think the human capital that we have, Pearl Street, AME Church has a Pearl. They're building, they have a senior living facility. I think that's going to be one of the newest construction that we have. That's going to add a whole lot of value to the quality of life of seniors, as far as affordable housing and health and safety. And it's I believe it's one of 5 models that's in the country, and it's extremely. It's going to be extremely exciting times. We have a few more needs than we have accomplishment, and certainly Jackson State is going to be, there are a lot of resources that we need to try and access to help Jackson State to realize its fullest potential. The sheriff partnering with the city and the county, was an initiative that we had conversation with Commissioner Simmons with the Public Transportation Commission to try to help clean up, so they've let contracts to individuals to try to help clean up the area. That's going to be more attractive. So I think that working together, we have to learn that the legislative branch, the city government and county government, working together, we can accomplish more than, us out here fighting one another.
Absolutely. So you've been in this seat since 2013. When you look back in essentially 10 years of being in the seat, a lot can happen in a decade. What would you say you would put your stamp on as Senator Norwood, this is what I did within this decade?
Well, I can be honest with you. It's not a whole, I have served in the 10 years I've been there, it's been under Republican administration. Unfortunately, I've introduced some good legislation. I like to see returning citizens their rights to be restored, so that once they complete their debt to society, they come back into our communities, they can be given full rights. They're eligible to vote. Right now, we are fighting for those individuals not to get the right to vote, which is an absolute shame. So I've introduced that legislation year after year after year, but unfortunately, it goes no place because that's not a priority of the majority. And I think that once we get to the point, as I stated earlier, that we start looking at good public policy rather than looking at the party that's introducing the legislation, I think that we can move forward and we will have some accomplishments.
Absolutely. When you talk about looking at the different public policy and looking at the different elections beyond for governor, what other races stand out to you that are going to be pivotal in looking at where the state goes and looking at the trajectory of the state moving forward?
Well, we have several House and Senate seats across the state that are competitive, and right now we're sitting at, in the Senate, we have 36, 16, we're in a minority, which means they have a supermajority and they can pass anything they want without a vote from us. And if you note, over the last 4 years especially, That has been the case. And what happened there is that, you don't get the full benefit of your thought process of working through things. I have some good ideas, but if you don't accept my good ideas, then, you're basically just going. And we have it where a lot of our colleagues would like to vote with you, but, they can't afford to vote with you because they would be, in some cases, chastised by their party for supporting that. So that's something it's holding the state back. Another thing that I really like and I look forward to, and we've introduced this proposal time after time, and that's basically the grocery tax. We're talking about income tax, reducing, but if you make no income, you're not paying any taxes anyway. So, but everybody that buys food, you're basically paying taxes. So if you're talking about a fair tax, let's start with the grocery tax and cutting the grocery tax. And we're one of the few states in America that have a tax on grocery. So that would be a super plus. Every year we introduce legislation to fully fund public education. That never happened. So we introduced state employee pay raise. That doesn't happen. So good legislation is introduced every year, but because we do not have the votes or the voice in the governor's mansion, it goes no place.
You've put a huge emphasis on policy, and obviously with that legislation. Do you think that depending on the turnout of Tuesday's elections, do you think that will sway voters to maybe deviate from their political parties and, like you said, go more towards more of the correct public policy for everyone?
I think when you look at the leadership, and I'm confident that should Brandon Presley be the successor, he will provide the leadership that's needed to bring Mississippi more to the middle than having to the extremes with the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And by that, you're going to represent the interests of the mass of our citizens. I was listening earlier where some of the students were talking about the bickering back and forth rather than putting their policy positions. I think the same way. I'm not interested. We got some Democrats that are going to introduce some bad legislation, and you got some Republicans. So I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in what is best for the state of Mississippi, and it doesn't matter if it's introduced by a Republican or if it's introduced by a Democrat. And I think that's the mindset that we need to be an effective body in this state and represent the interests of the citizens in this state.
Absolutely. Now, like I said, it's November, last couple months of 2023. Before you know it, the 2024 legislative session will be in. Considering you've mentioned several issues and policies and things of that nature, what would you say is the biggest issue that you're concerned about going into the 2024 legislative session?
Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion because it impacts so many working Mississippians, and there is no need for that to continue. Resources have been made available, and Mississippi has refused to accept those resources. It's not only a health care issue, it's also going to stimulate the economy because you're talking about 16,000 good-paying jobs. You're talking about a more of a healthy workforce. It's going to help small businesses, so it's going to help the Mississippi economy and it's going to help Mississippians all around. So I think that that's going to be one of the biggest wish that I think that most of us, especially on the Democratic side, will want.
Absolutely. And if you had to give a gauge in terms of giving any predictions for tonight's races, what would you consider some of the predictions in tonight's races, just beyond the governor's race?
Well, turnout is key, and from what I'm hearing from across the state, turnout has been good. And I know turnout is good here in Harris County. Turnout is good in, I talked to someone in Washington County. Turnout is good. I talked to someone on the coast. The turnout is good. So the turnout is extremely good. And I just, unfortunately, we've had some challenges with individual polls not having enough ballots, which is very unfortunate. Machines not working, very unfortunate. And I just hope that our citizens, stand firm and, refuse to leave, because we had too many individuals that fought and bled and died for us to get the right to vote. And the right to vote is a sacred privilege, right, that we have now. So I think we need to take advantage of it.
So, Senator Noor, we've had some early numbers to come in. Right now in the governor's race, Brandon Presley has 66.2% of the vote, and Tate Reeves has 29.8% of the vote. We also have some numbers from the lieutenant governor's race. D. Ryan Grover has 65.6% of the votes, and Delbert Hoseman has 34.4% of the votes. With Secretary of State, Ty Pinkins has 64.9% of the votes, and Michael Watson has 35.1% of the votes. And with Attorney General, we have Greta Kemp Martin with 62% of the votes and Lynn Fitch with 38%. So I wanted to ask you, what's your general reaction, early reaction to those numbers?
Well, it sounds good. I just hope that it's something that we can keep. And listen at the numbers is probably coming from a Democratic stronghold county. Harris County is going to be important. What we do in Harris County is going to be extremely important. What we do in Mississippi Delta is going to be extremely important. And what we do in southwest Mississippi, from Jackson down to Macomb and Natchez and here, that's going to be extremely important. And I can say that, in my lifetime, I think Brendan has made his stops throughout 82 counties. That's unprecedented. And to spend time in those counties, and he has probably worked harder for this position than anybody that I know of, and I think it'd be hard to. I mean, he deserved. He said he wanted to earn it, and I think he earned the votes. Every vote that he get, I think he earned that vote because he worked hard. Not that he expected anybody to vote for him just because he was a Democrat or just because he was running for governor, and just because you wanted to vote for one of the two. He wanted to earn it, and I really think that he has earned that vote. And I know he earned mine. I mean, and I talked with him, and I like to call it like it is, and I can assure you that he got my vote, but he earned it.
Absolutely. Well, we'll definitely find out tonight with some more numbers as they continue to come in. And thank you so much for your time, Senator. We appreciate all you do for JSU and the constituents of District 28. Maya Angelou once said, if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going. Multimedia journalism student Jamia Alexander reports on the impact voting rights and the civil rights movements played on our campus.
Was in 1966, James Meredith's March Against Fear, where after the Voting Rights Act, he organized to show Black Mississippians that they had nothing to fear in registering to vote.
Nearly 60 years after James Meredith's March Against Fear, Jackson State University remains a catalyst for voting rights and other human rights that oppress people of color. JSU's history professor, Dr. Luckett, recalls the two historical events that occurred in Jackson, Mississippi.
By the time that march arrived in Jackson, there were over 30,000 people in downtown Jackson rallying around the right to vote. It's on that march that Willie Ricks and Stokely Carmichael will coin the term Black Power in America in Mississippi in 1966. That legacy of protesting, not just for voting rights, but for civil rights, for human dignity, has gone on to this day. We even think about someone like Jackson State student Macy Brown when she was in high school helping to organize the George Floyd protests that happened in downtown Jackson, which was the second largest protest in the history of the state of Mississippi since the 1966 March Against Fear.
While blacks were oppressed, they still demanded their rights aggressively.
And so Black people, African Americans, had to demand that access and demand that power. And really, that was a centerpiece, obviously, of the Civil Rights Movement, of Freedom Summer, of accessing the right to vote. The great accomplishment was the 1965 Voting Rights Act that would bring hundreds of thousands, millions of Black Southerners onto the voting rolls for the very first time, and arguably making this nation a democracy for the very first time in 1965. That voting power in Mississippi led the state to have the most black elected officials. It led places like Jackson to eventually have a city council form of government where people in a city that is now the blackest city in America, 87% African American, could elect people to represent them who look like themselves. It has, for the last 50 to 60 years, been the Voting Rights Act, the most significant source of electoral empowerment for black Mississippians, the most important democratic tool in the last 50 to 60 years.
Due to the rapid increase of civil rights organizations, the Council of Federate Organizations was established, making voter registration and education an A-list priority.
COFO is the Council of Federated Organizations. It's a civil rights group that was unique to Mississippi, founded by the late great activist Bob Moses, who had this idea coming from his organization, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, to Mississippi. He said, why don't we take all of these groups that are working here during the civil rights movement and let's organize them under one umbrella. Let's bring everybody together. Let's coordinate our work around voting rights, around direct action protests like sit-ins. Let's all work together. It's pretty unique. It didn't happen anywhere else. It only existed in Mississippi.
What y'all gonna do?
Today, the NAACP's legacy continues on Jackson State University's campus.
JSU! JSU!
The role for NAACP on this campus for the upcoming election is extremely big. We've had politics on the plaza where we partner with the JSU votes, the NAACP of Jackson State University and Jackson, Mississippi, where we educated people on why voting is important, also registered people to vote in Mississippi.
That power is really significant.
The COFO and NAACP believes in the future of our leaders.
In the state of Mississippi, we are already a majority black and brown state under the age of 18. Our young people in this state are black people and brown people. Their collective power promises, if we can educate them, if we can engage them, if we can get them voting, it promises to bring important, significant change to this state change that so many people have been fighting for so long, have been looking forward to. And that gives me some real hope that our future, well within my lifetime, well within our lifetimes, shows great promise.
Visit JSU's COFO Civil Rights Education Center at 1013 John R. Lynch Street in Jackson, Mississippi. Reporting for JSU Television, I am Jamia Alexander.
Joining us now, Dr. Maurice Mangum and Dr. Eric Schmidt. Dr. Mangum is the Department Chair of Political Science at Jackson State University. He's an American politics scholar, specializing in African American politics, race in politics, and political behavior. Dr. Eric Schmidt is an assistant professor of government and politics at Millsaps College. He teaches courses on American politics, political parties and interest groups, research methods, and political philosophy. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. And as we get ready to just jump in, we have some new numbers in tonight's election. For Governor, Brandon Presley currently has 82.6% of the vote, while Tate Reeves has 15.7% of the vote. With Lieutenant Governor, D. Ryan Grover has 71.7% of the vote, while Deborah Holzman has 28.3%. And with the Secretary of State, Ty Pinkins has 76.3%, and Michael Watson currently has 23.7%. So I want to pose this question to start off to both of you. What are your general thoughts about the results that are coming in right now in today's election?
Well, thank you very much for having me. And for having us, I would say that right now it's way too early to make any determination about who's going to win the election based on the turnout statistics that you've read. My guess is that that's less than 1-2% of the vote statewide. I'm really not confident making any kind of projection for now. It appears as if turnout in Hinds County was higher than some people had expected, and that might cause the Democratic Party and the Presley campaign to have some optimism, but I'm just not sure.
Professor Manning.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Schmidt. The only thing I would like to add is that it depends on where those numbers came from. If they came from a Democratic stronghold, which it sounds like they did, that's expected. Now, if it came from an area that was leaning Republican or Republican, then that would be amazing. That would be shocking. But then that would portend something pretty good for the Presley campaign. However, like Dr. Schmidt said, this is way early. There might only been 1%, maybe 2% of the turnout. So it's way, there's no reason to be optimistic right now.
Absolutely. So in knowing that these numbers are very early right now, what do you expect the outcome of tonight's election will be?
I do expect it to be fairly close, largely because I believe that the Presley campaign did a pretty good job of trying to get turnout, and especially among the African American community. We know that if a Democrat is to do well in this state, they need a lot of the African Americans to turn out to vote. And with African Americans making about 40% of the electorate, he's going to need a good 30-some odd percent of them to turn out to vote, because we know that this is a red state. The Republicans have a lock on this state, and we know not all the African Americans and other voters of color are going to turn out. So with that in mind, it still could be a close race, or just closer than expected.
I'm going to have to concur with Dr. Mankum on that. I would be surprised if the race was decided by more than 5 or 6 percentage points, but I learned a long time ago that social scientists should generally avoid predicting things if we, can avoid it. I just don't know.
Absolutely. And I want to ask this question. With this election, or these series of elections, policies have become a big emphasis on that. And I wanted to ask this, with partisan polarization, what role does that play in today's political climate?
Sure. Well, thank you for that question. It actually ties into my research agenda pretty clearly. Let me kind of unpack this for you. This is my first semester teaching at Millsaps College. I came here from a 2-year stint up at Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota. So Moorhead, Minnesota to Jackson, Mississippi. Very different places, very different student bodies. The one thing that the students in my intro U.S. politics classes at both campuses have in common is that all of them use the terms Republican and conservative interchangeably. They believe that those mean the exact same thing, and they know something about what those terms mean. And they use the terms liberal and Democrat interchangeably and have been taught to do so. So partisan polarization at the national level has had a huge effect on politics in every statewide context too. Mississippi no less than Minnesota. So I believe right now that as people are going to the polls, no matter the issue positions that Brandon Presley or Tate Reeves happen to have, if you voted for the Republican candidate today, you believed that you were voting for the conservative candidate. And if you voted for Brandon Presley, you believed, whether he's anti-abortion or not, that he is the liberal candidate in the race, and you would have a point.
Yeah, let me talk about what party polarization or political polarization means. It means that the two opposite sides are becoming further apart. What that does, though, is it makes it easier to determine which party you should support. So what you have now is you have the Republican Party that is moving further to the right, while the Democratic Party isn't moving much further to the left. So it seems like there's a great deal of polarization, largely because it's easier to determine which is the conservative candidate versus the liberal candidate, and it makes it easier to determine whether you're not going to support, whether or not you will support a Democrat or Republican, because it's clear there are clear differences between them. And that's based largely on the demographic shifts that are taking place in the country. The country is becoming more racial minority in terms of the percentages of people of color. And so, within decades, people of color will be the voting majority in this country. And so what you do see is you see a lot of efforts by the Republicans to curtail political power by people of color. And so when we talk about the issues and how they help people determine for whom to vote, we're talking about abortion and other issues that really do determine what the differences are between the parties. And so even in Mississippi, abortion could be an issue. It wasn't too much of an issue with this in this gubernatorial election, but it's still probably on the minds of many voters because nationwide, polarization is very prominent.
Absolutely, and I want to pose a question to you guys. A recent ABC News poll revealed that 76% of Americans believe that the country is headed in the wrong direction. And with that, we're a year out from the U.S. presidential election. Do you think that partisan polarization will play an impact on the overall outcome of next year's presidential election?
Oh, partisan polarization is the context for every election that happens in the United States today, whether it's national, state, or local. It's not an accident that the Reeves campaign made so much of former President Trump's endorsement. I mean, we are talking about a political context where, as I said earlier, everybody understands one party to be the conservative party, and everybody understands the other party to be the liberal party. So that's not going to change in 2024. And Donald Trump and whomever, well, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are going to loom about as large in 2024 as they did in 2020.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked the question because it allows us to talk about why these off-year elections that happen in these odd number years are important. They're important because they are focused more on state and local issues. So while your question is about national forces, that'll play a part in 2024. So in 2023, it's the gubernatorial election that is going to be more prominent. Now, while that's a high stimulus election, meaning it's going to yield a lot of interest and campaigning, therefore more turnout in the off year, it's not going to do as much as it will during the presidential election. So that means that when you have these off-year elections, that means it's going to be about state and local politics. So right now, it doesn't seem like those polarizing issues are playing a part, but they will in 2024. And largely because you're going to have issues about race and women's reproductive rights playing a major role in 2024.
Absolutely, and we're talking about obviously abortion, women's rights, these different issues. And I want to kind of tap into some other issues. Obviously, the economy and inflation, big issues amongst Americans. Do you believe that these are two of the biggest issues among Americans nationally, and how do you see that unfolding in 2024?
It appears at the moment that a majority of Americans, as is usually the case, believe the economy to be the most important issue. And right now, they perceive that to mean inflation, and for very good reason. Unless inflation just does a total turnaround by 2024, I anticipate that's going to be the big issue in 2024. As for Medicaid expansion, since so many states have already expanded Medicaid under Obamacare, this appears to be an issue that may not affect national politics in other states to the degree that it affects national political races in Mississippi, but I just don't know.
Yeah, the economy is always an issue. Now, the problem for the Biden administration is it's going to be an issue against him, as if things stay the way they are now. So when we have these presidential elections, they're largely a referendum on the president's performance. So if the president is not performing well in office, he's most likely going to lose votes or maybe even lose the election. Given the economy is not doing well now, Biden stands to lose votes or the election. And so that puts the Republican candidate in a better light. So if things change, like Dr. Schmidt said, yeah, the Biden administration is going to benefit from an improved economy. However, there are ways to, make it where the economy is not as influential in terms of people's voting. He can do a number of things, and he tried to do a couple things by forgiving student loans. And so, of course, the Republicans were against that because that would have helped his party do well at the polls, at the precinct. So economy will be a major issue, as it always will, but there are going to be other issues as well.
Absolutely, and we talk about the performances of presidents when they're in office in the White House. Let's discuss a little bit about the former president, U.S. President Donald Trump. Do you believe, as he continues to plan a potential bid to run for president once again, do you believe that the criminal trials that he's dealing with right now, or do you think that it'll play an effect on whether or not he gets reelected to the White House?
Well, if you'd asked a political scientist that question even 10, 15 years ago, they would have said, of course. Of course, you have somebody facing, what is it, more than 100 felony charges across 4 different criminal indictments. Yeah, that tends to be the kind of thing that disqualifies a candidate for president in the public eye. The fact that it hasn't speaks to just how strong party identification is right now, and also probably how strong that linkage between your party and your ideology is right now. I mean, if you really believe, as conservative Republicans have every right to believe, that abortion is murder and that there should be a nationwide ban on abortion, say, you're going to put up with somebody who's facing 100 felony counts against them if you get this overwhelming policy success that you have every right to demand if that's your point of view. And you could say the exact same, you could imagine the counterfactual if there were a Democratic presidential candidate facing criminal indictments.
Yeah, right now these are hypotheticals in the sense that while Trump is doing well compared to the other Republicans running for the nomination, he hasn't won the nomination yet. Right. Now, it's likely he will, but when the time comes to consider Trump versus Biden, will a majority of the voters still want Trump? So he can do well now to get the nomination. When it comes to the general election where it's the Democrat versus the Republican, people have to think long and hard. Do you want an indicted, two-time impeached president to be your next president? And if they recall how things were when he was president and all the discussions and policies revolving around racism, xenophobia, homophobia, Islamophobia, et cetera, they may not want that back because they did vote him out of office in 2020. So it may just take, about several months of campaigning from the Democratic Party to remind voters of what you did have between 16 and 20 and that you do not want that again.
Absolutely. Now we're going to shift a little bit from the national side and go to stateside. So obviously, leading up to Tuesday's elections, we had a lot of corruption within the state. I.e. the Tate Reeves scandal with the TANF funds, and then also the bigger issue of Medicaid expansion. How much do you think that will play a big role in who wins in tonight's elections?
It appears from the public opinion polling that I've seen that it's very much on voters' minds. Now, one thing that I struggle with when I'm asked to explain election results or explain why a result might come out a certain way is that the results of elections are very complicated. I mean, an election is sort of a blunt instrument. It tells you, right, which candidate was preferred by the most people that went to vote. So there's never one nice, tidy, pat explanation for why, say, Reeves won or Presley won. I think that if you really wanted to sift down and see what this perception of corruption at the statewide level had to do with whatever the result ends up being, you would really need to get into some fine-grained public opinion polling. And there's lots of reputable survey firms that are conducting that work right now.
Yeah, what he's talking about are exit polling. And so when people leave the polls after voting, sometimes they're asked to respond to a certain number of questions indicating what were the major issues and why did they vote the way they did. But like Dr. Schmidt is saying, election results are just the preference. Who knows why people voted the way they did. There are a number of different reasons why they do. It could be just on party identification. It could be based on, well, I've heard of Tate Reeves since he's the governor, and, well, that's who I vote for because people tend to vote for who they can recall. So that if the incumbent is running, they tend to benefit because their name is more widely recognized. It could just be that simple. Some people might have just heard, well, I'm gonna just flip a coin. There's a number of reasons. Now, whether or not the scandals have made an impact, it could be. It could be that did. But the thing about people and politicians is they tend to believe that politicians are corrupt to a large extent, that they will misapply the truth. And so who do you believe when one is saying, oh yeah, he was involved in the scandal, and the other one says, no, I wasn't. And then what do you do? So there are going to be other issues and other reasons to determine the vote and the outcome of this election, although that might have played a part in it. But what we know generally, like what we've seen from Trump, people will make whatever excuse they want to justify their vote. And so if they want to believe a scandal or not, that's what they want to do based on their preferences that they already had in mind anyways.
Absolutely. So what you're essentially saying in so many words is the potential for Tate Reeves to potentially get another term in office is very much realistic.
Very realistic.
So I want to ask this question. When you start looking at other races within the state, are there any other races that stand out to you guys that's just as important as the governor's race?
Well, if you look at who the incumbents are versus their challengers, we're in a red state. And so the Republicans are largely your incumbents, so they're going to do well. They're going to have name recognition. They're going to have already proven that they know how to win elections. They're going to have donors who are ready to give so they can wage very effective campaigns. All those things favor the incumbent, and the incumbents tend to be Republican in Mississippi. So I can't say there's any particular office that I'm looking forward to as terms of looking at the results. But it just seems like in the general climate, things might be a little bit more competitive than they would normally be. But with all the advantages that the incumbent has, it's still likely that the Republicans are going to win most of these races.
I'm keeping an eye on the state auditor race. I think that it'll be interesting when all of the ballots are counted to see just what the vote differential between the vote for Tate Reeves and the vote for current state auditor Shad White was. That could potentially give you a hint about just how much the corruption that people perceive to be plaguing Mississippi was on voters' minds. Because of the Republicans on the ballot today, Shad White's certainly the one who's been most strident in saying, because it's part of his job responsibilities, that I'm going to combat corruption, even if it's within my own party.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Mangum, Dr. Schmidt, thank you for joining us tonight and sharing your political insight. Joining us now is WJSU FM's Meredith Michelle, who's reporting live from the Mississippi East Center at JSU. Special guests and supporters of the Department of Journalism and Media Studies are gathered to join our live coverage. Hey Meredith, how are things with you at the watch party?
If I'm being completely honest, all eyes on you. But you definitely change the party with. I'm standing here with Senator Truman Frazier, who has represented District 27?
That's correct.
For 30 years?
That's correct.
Okay, Senator Frazier, based on that, what would you say is your realistic optimism for Brandon Presley's run for governor tonight?
Well, I've been very impressed with Brandon Presley's run for governor. He's been covering the entire state, talking about the issues that affect real people. One of the most pressing issues we face right now is hospitals are closing around the state, in trouble. He's been talking about expanding Medicaid. That's going to bring relief out of hospitals throughout the state. So that's a major issue that he's talking about. I think people are running behind him also that. They see that we have a chance to provide public health care to all of our people and also jobs. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm real optimistic about it.
Okay, how do Democratic senators such as yourself continue pushing day after day after day to keep that sort of optimism when your colleague Senator Warren just spoke to our news desk about how important it actually is not to make promises but rather to keep them?
Because we represent people we have to make sure that we're fighting here about today. Look at our legislature. It's 2/3 Republican right now in the House and the Senate. They switch. When I was first elected, we have Democrats in charge. But something happened after Obama was elected. A lot of them changed parties. They went from the blue jersey to the red jersey. And the philosophy has not changed, but we have to make sure that we work every day for our people because if we present good proposals, we have to fight very hard for them until we get a vote on them.
What are some of the top priorities concerning Mississippians in your district for this election cycle?
Well, if you look at a total picture, that corruption is a big thing, TANF corruption. They have misspent roughly $77 million of TANF funds. And if the federal government looks at us carefully, they're going to require us to repay that money, not with federal funds, with state funds. So looking at the fact that we're going to repay that money is going to be a big part of it. How we're going to do that is going to depend on the voters of this state. We have our governor talking about rolling back the income tax. That's not going to benefit the folks that we represent in our districts. We have President talking about rolling back on the sales tax. That's going to have a greater impact on the folks we're serving. But if we have to pay back the $77 million of misspent TANF funds, where's it going to come from? It's going to come from the pockets of the taxpayers in Mississippi. It's not going to come from federal funds. One thing we have to look at in this district is that we have $1 billion of surplus funds that we have not spent in the treasury, just sitting up there. But that $1 billion is going to evaporate very quickly because a lot of those funds won't be coming back because a lot of the funds came as a result of COVID, and also federal funds come to the state. So that money will be spent by 2026, and we have to look at a way to make that up. But my folks are very concerned about whether or not they're going to be in a position to afford groceries, whether or not they're in a position to have a quality education fund, Jackson State, or Corning Valley. Those are going to be very pocketbook issues in my district.
Okay. And well, as you know, and basically just mentioned, we are on the campus of Jackson State University. In your 3 decades as a senator, what do you think drives the apathy in young voters the most? And do you see that trend changing?
A lot of our young folks don't see how it affects their lives. Look at Jackson State, for instance. Look at the past water crisis. A lot of our students were forced to do without the basic necessity of water. They couldn't take showers in the dormitories. They had to use porta potties. That's a decision that can't be corrected by the legislature and the governor. If we properly fund Jackson State, give them the resources they need, they can't have a water system on campus that won't be relying on the city water system. We have catastrophes such as that. When we look at Jackson State, a lot of our students coming here, they don't have a place to stay, and that's because we have not given them the money to build dormitories. But a strong governor, Democratic governor, will be advocating for Jackson State to build those dormitories so the students will have a place to stay. But when students say that how their vote's going to affect their livelihood, they're going to be more inclined to vote. If they see that we're going to get better dormitories because of Democratic administration, they're going to vote Democratic for their elected officials. If they see that we're going to have a strong water system addressing the infrastructure problem on the campus, they're going to look at that and say, well, those guys have our interests at heart, so we're going to vote for those guys. So if they see that how it's going to affect them personally, they're going to be more inclined to vote. And like I said, the water situation going to be driving force behind it, and also dormitories be the driving force behind it. And that's the real way it's going to affect their lives going forward.
Thank you, Senator Frazier, for joining us. I'm Meredith Hairston, live in the watch party of the JSU TV studio. Back to you.
Continuing with our coverage, we have a couple minutes before 8 o'clock before the polls in Hinds County are being closed, but we have new numbers. For the governor's race, Brandon Presley has 40.5% of the vote. Currently, Tate Reeves has 58.1% of the vote. For Lieutenant Governor, D. Ryan Grover has 50.9% of the vote, and Delbert Hoseman has 49.1% of the vote. For Secretary of State, Ty Pinkins has 56% of the vote, while Michael Watson has currently 44% of the vote. For Attorney General, Greta Kemp Martin currently has 37.4% of the vote, and Lynn Fitch with 62.6% of the vote. Voters on campus have expressed concern for crime in the capital city and its effects on the university. Multimedia journalism student Miriam Howard reports on the issue of crime and what officials say they're doing to keep students safe.
When it comes to crime in the city, it has unfortunately escalated.
Crime is no stranger to the capital city of Jackson. According to NeighborhoodScouts.com, Jackson rates a 4 in the scale of safe neighborhoods, with 100 being the safest. Former Jackson police officer Kevin Levine says it may be due to a lack of adequate policing.
That's the problem. Jackson has an extremely high turnover rate in law enforcement. You get officers that get experience and then pay or whatever reason, they don't stay.
While JPD's newly appointed Chief Joseph Wade works to make sure the city of Jackson is a safer place, Jackson State Campus Police have the responsibility of protecting students who may not be so sure about Jackson State's safety. Jackson native and sophomore Jarek Peterson says he was held at gunpoint 2 years before enrolling at Jackson State.
I had fear within me coming here just due to my traumatic experience, but now that I'm out of that fear, I feel very safe and I feel like that comfort.
Comfort. That's exactly what officers want students to feel during their time at Jackson State. Campus Police Chief Herman Horton says it all starts with answering when the students call.
So coming here to Jackson State, one of the first things I found out was that there was a disconnect between officers' response time to answer the calls for service on behalf of the students. So prior to my coming here, some steps were already made to incorporate a different method of response. And as you probably have seen around campus, the green UTVs that we have, that is part of that plan because it allows us now to travel from the farthest southeast end of the campus, which is over by the ball field, all the way to the northwest end of the campus, which is over by the AAC, in less than 2 minutes. Because prior to that, we still have patrol vehicles. However, those vehicles allows us only to travel on the streets. These vehicles allow us to travel anywhere that anyone can walk.
Jackson State's 2021 crime statistic report documents that the most crime committed at Jackson State is burglary, with over 50 offenses in 2019, the second highest being drug abuse. However, Levine says that may not be too uncommon for college campuses.
Believe it or not, I have my freshmen do an assignment. Their first assignment is look up the crime statistics for Jackson State and do a comparable analysis to that with other colleges in the state or wherever they choose. And then tell me what does the crime stats say to you about crime here at Jackson State. I try not to include the surrounding area because I first want them to focus on where they are. And a lot of them are surprised to learn that other institutions in the state have bigger problems than we do. And it helps foster a sense of security and go back and tell mom, daddy, look, yeah, we had this, but this happens at every institution.
According to Jackson State's archivist, crime on campus isn't widely documented, seemingly on purpose.
With a lot of what happens in the crime, here recently, I've been trying to collect for the archives when we have killings here at Jackson State University. But in the past, you don't have a lot of information on that's been documented because they don't want that to be brought up.
Whether documented or not, crime is a citywide issue that has to be addressed. Regardless of what statistics may show, some students say crime is everywhere, and Jackson State isn't as bad as the places they're from.
They're fun, but I mean, out here, you know, every place has its own hood. Every place has its own like trap, ghetto, whatever you want to call it. But I mean, I feel safe here, just like I feel safe at home.
The problem of crime in Jackson won't be solved overnight, but JSU campus officials and students alike all share a common desire: a safe school. I'm Miriam Howard.
Political science student Kennedy Boykin. Boykin is a graduating senior from St. Louis, Missouri, and currently serves as the president of JSU Votes. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So before we jump into questions, we have some new numbers in. So in the governor's race, currently Brandon Presley has 39.9% of the vote, while Tate Reeves has 58.6% of the vote. Secretary of State Ty Pinkins has 37.9% of the vote, while Michael Watson currently has 62.1% of the vote. State Auditor Larry Bradford currently has 48% of the vote, while Shad White currently has 52% of the vote. In the state treasurer's race, Addie Green has 49% of the vote, while David McRae has 51% of the vote. In the lieutenant governor's race, D. Ryan Grover has 38.1% of the vote, and Delbert Holzman currently has 61.9% of the vote. So I want to ask you, just to dive into our conversation, what are your general thoughts as you hear some of these numbers, even just from a student's perspective? Because I know you've been instrumental in encouraging students to go to the polls to vote.
When I hear those new numbers, I feel a little sad, I'll say. I feel like I thought we worked really hard. I know it's not over yet, so I'm going to keep the faith and hold strong, but I do feel a little wavered by those numbers, I'm not going to lie. I do believe we did a lot of canvassing this year, especially expressing how important this was to our fellow students, especially about the governor's race. That's the big one, I guess you could say, so yeah.
Absolutely. And so with the work that you do as an activist and organizer, what does that look like in today's political climate, especially, you know, addressing and bringing these issues to college students?
That's a great question, actually. So I think it'll really start with the students and just seeing where they are and how far we have to go to get them to a point where they feel comfortable going to the polls and voting for candidates by themselves. So I feel like that's like our biggest challenge right now, is trying to figure out where all of our students are, because we have students from all different backgrounds and all kinds of things. So just trying to figure out where are they coming from, where can we meet them at, what can we do to make sure that we're engaging them and that this is something that they want to do, because ultimately, if it's not something that you want to do, you're not likely to do it. So.
In terms of building that interest in wanting them to vote and encouraging them to vote, what are some things that you learn when encouraging them to vote, and like some of the myths and misconceptions that you probably often have to correct that they have in terms of the voting process?
So I'll start with the latter part first. So as far as the myths, the biggest one that people often hear is that my vote doesn't matter, my vote doesn't count. And at this point, everybody at Jackson State should be able to say that that's not true and that their vote does count. Now, just trying to get our students engaged, one thing that we see is very popular amongst the students is what we have on campus, like the hot spots and with food and music. So we see that those are things that really get our students active enough to be able to talk to them about voting in the first place. So yeah.
So pulled some numbers. Research shows that Gen Z has the opportunity to really impact the future and reform in the United States. And more so, Gen Zers and millennials make up the largest generation and tend to lean more toward the Democratic Party. And where you sit as an activist and what you do on a consistent basis, do you think that this will be somewhat of the turnout, the voter turnout in today's elections?
Maybe as a whole, but not in today's specific state elections, just because when people talk about things from a more general standpoint, they're covering the whole United States, not Mississippi in the deep South. So I feel like that's maybe just a little too broad for us, but definitely for the next election cycle, for the presidential election maybe, but maybe not tonight.
When encouraging Gen Zers, millennials to vote, what does that look like in terms of like the platforms? Like I know obviously we've seen over time technology changes everything, and it's been a big thing. I can assure you that, you know, with the text messages I've received, just, you know, getting, you know, informing people about voting, how much has technology played a part in this year's elections?
Technology has played an immense role this year. Like you said, you're getting the text messages, so we do the text message drives and really get people engaged, but also just reposting or resharing on all these different social medias, especially because there's so many different social media platforms. And so when you're involving other organizations, you can get them to use their platform, which may have a bigger base than yours, but ultimately everybody has the same goal, and that's to get these young people out and voting.
So in getting them to vote, what would you say has been the biggest factor for example, more so, I mean, like you may run across someone who stopped by and was like, you know, I'm not sure if I want to vote. What was the one thing, that biggest factor that encouraged him or her to want to vote in this year's election?
Reminding them that if they don't vote, somebody else is going to cast their vote for them. And I think when you start telling people like, hey, you have a voice, you can use it, but if you're not using it, somebody's going to use it for you and take your opportunity away from you. That's when people start to realize like, oh, wait a minute, there's another side to this, so yeah.
So as a JSU student, what are some of the issues that you're concerned with the most, or that affect you and some of your peers on a daily basis?
Right now, the two biggest issues facing us, well, I'll say three, but the three biggest issues facing us would be the crime, the water, and our president. And I'm pretty sure everybody has heard about all of these things, but definitely crime, water, and president.
And when you think about, say, for example, the water issue, as students, I can only imagine what that feels like, not being able to have water to do essential things that you need to do in life. How does that make you feel when you've had to navigate a situation like that?
It makes me feel like I want to go and personally cut off the water and have these politicians in the same conditions that I'm in, and just see if they could survive in that way. Can they still function in the way they do? Would they still say the same things that they would say if they were facing what we are facing? Because people often say things from an outside perspective, and they're not actually walking in those shoes, so they don't really know. They can only just say what they see or what they perceive.
Absolutely. And you mentioned crime. With that, obviously, you know, Jackson State University is located in West Jackson, not necessarily considered the best part of the city. But in considering that, you know, what are your thoughts on crime, and how do you think things could be better, or getting the proper assistance from politicians to make that area better in the city?
Okay, that's a great question. So I'll start by saying this, that crime is everywhere, and I really wish people would understand that it's not just Jackson that has crime, not just Jackson State that goes through things. So aside from that, I would say that we need to have our local and state politicians on the same page as far as who we're going to give money to try to counteract these crimes that we're keep talking about happening. And I'll say that there has been some attempts, but maybe they were a little misguided or misdirected. But yeah, I would just say that we just need to get our state and local people on the same page.
And speaking of that, getting things on page, you work with JSU Vote. So what does that look like on a daily basis in terms of like the logistical process?
Okay, yeah, so usually we'll start like with a big idea or big project that we have from August to December, and then from January to April, well, May. But we have projects for each month that we try to start around campus. So each month we'll say what our project is, and then the next meeting, that's when we'll dive deeper into seeing like who all do we need to contact, do we need to rent any spaces, do we need to get vendors, and then just moving on from that, then we'll say like, okay, well, how many registration forms do we need? Is everybody gonna have a table? How are we gonna set this up? Who's gonna be in charge of what, like assigning tasks and things like that. So.
Absolutely. And in thinking about that, I want to ask this question: where do you see tonight's elections going in terms of the future of this state?
I would probably say it maybe depend on the results. That's probably going to be the biggest factor deciding about how Mississippi goes forward. But honestly, I would say that either way it goes, I do think that just if people are keeping up with these updates as far as the numbers and everything go, they'll see that, okay, there is something going on, even if it's not the result that you wanted tonight, but you still see like how close it may have came, or you see how much further you need to go for the next election. So I definitely think that people are, regardless whichever side you're on, win or lose, you're going to take it and you're going to go far for next time.
Absolutely. I want to ask this: what do you think will be the deciding factor? Because obviously we all know that Mississippi has been a red state for quite some time. When you look at that, what do you feel like will be the deciding factor for the voter turnout in tonight's election?
Can you ask one more time?
So in terms of, obviously Mississippi has been a red state for quite some time.
Right.
And when you look at, where the state is and how people are advocating for a change, what do you think will be the deciding factor in tonight's voter turnout?
Okay, it's probably going to be between the corruption issue and Medicaid. I feel like those are the big two things that are really on people's minds right now. So,
what makes you say that?
Just from talking to people, interacting, not just with students at Jackson State, but just in the Jackson community or in the Mississippi community as a whole, these are topics that tend to come up over and over again. So I definitely think that people are going to be voting about that tonight.
Absolutely. And you're a student. You're a current student at Jackson State. So I know often students, while they're in school, even students that have graduated from school, student loan forgiveness, things of that nature. One day you're going to graduate from Jackson State, and you're going to have to, whether if you have student loans or not. Right. What is that? How do you feel about the legislation and that process in terms of how it affects students?
I feel like it maybe could have been a little bit more transparent, because I feel like that's the issue right now, is that people feel like they were left in the dark or misled about how things were going to go as far as getting them canceled and everything. So I feel like transparency would definitely be like our biggest hurdle right now as far as student loans.
Absolutely. Beyond the governor's race, are there any other races tonight that you have your eye on very closely, whether if it's the Attorney General, Secretary of State, any of those races that really stand out to you beyond the governor's race?
Yes, I definitely have my eye on the Attorney General's race between Ms. Martin and Ms. Finch. So, yeah, just leave it there.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining our election night coverage this evening.
Thank you for having me again.
Up next, journalism students took to the streets to interview their peers about their thoughts on voting and what the university can do to encourage voter education.
I feel like Jackson State could really just get it out there more, how important it is to vote and the impact that it have. I feel like they could broadcast it more and let them know the importance behind it and what can come with the results of voting.
If it's spoken about more, if it's not spoken about, no one's really gonna, talk about it and be more engaged.
Do you think that student activities and everything like that could engage other students to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it can. I mean, if you're more engaging and you have I don't know. I would just say be more engaging and talk about it more, because it's not really talked about, and no one really cares about voting if you don't have a meaning behind it.
If they see people their age, like their peers do it, I feel like they should be thinking about doing it as well.
A lot of us really don't even know about voting. Like voting it's not a big thing to us. It's a big thing to our parents, so our parents put that on us. Oh, you gotta vote, or you gotta do this, that, and the third. But for us, like, it wasn't like brought to us as, okay, as college students we gotta vote. Like, it was always put on by our parents.
Do you think that we have to improve on educating people on voting and how to, so they do care?
Yes, because if people they don't really know, the majority of the story, what all comes with voting. Like, they just think, oh, I voted, you know what I'm saying? But they don't even know who they voted for.
What are some ways you think JSU can do to help improve student voting?
They should help by at least, announcing it in class and be more, give more information on it, because we don't have information about who we're voting for, and then, politics. No one really cares about politics. So,
Most students like us, we like to be entertained. So if we can get more artists that we like and stuff, and tell them to come to us and tell us to vote. Also, if more professors talked about it more, I feel like it'll spread a little bit more awareness and stuff like that.
I think the events that we have provided for our students really do help push each other to vote. I think encouraging more of our students and our peers and our classmates to vote and getting the word out will definitely help.
I think that everyone coming to the school and getting to give their campaign speeches and stuff is actually really helpful. I think a lot of people either had classes or things that day. It was kind of around midterms. So I feel I check my email a lot. I think pamphlets, things like that, just short little does that make sense? Short little descriptions of each candidate, their policies and things would have just been helpful. But that's also on me. I should do research.
And as a college student, do you feel like your vote is important?
As a college student, I feel like my vote might be one of the most important, because this is what's going to really affect me in the real world as I'm transitioning into adult independent life.
I think they should have more student engagement when it comes to voting. People our age is on social media, so broadcasting more on social media, have events on the plaza about voting and stuff. Have a student face instead of an adult or a professor or anything.
I feel like there could be a lot more maybe forums, panels, things like that, where people come and talk to us politicians maybe just about voting, educate us on, the possibilities of what we could do for our community and things like that with just a vote.
I feel like Jackson State could.
In our election night coverage, we have new numbers. In the governor's race, Brandon Presley, 40.9%, with Tate Reeves having 57.6%. In the lieutenant governor race, D. Ryan Grover has 37%, and Delbert Hoseman has 63.1%. Secretary of State, Ty Pinkins has 36.7%, with Michael Watson having 63.3%. Attorney General's race, Greta Kemp Martin has 37.8%, with Lynn Fitch leading with 62.2%. And in the state auditor's race, Larry Bradford has 37%, while Shad White has 63%. And we're going to continue with our live election night coverage. JSU TV's Desmond Matthews is live from Reeves' campaign party. Desmond, what can you share with us right now from Reeves headquarters?
Stand by.
Multimedia journalism student Jalea Daughtry is inside Brandon Presley's election night watch party. Jalea, what is the mood like at Presley's camp?
We're at the Faulkner in downtown Jackson, where supporters are coming on in to spend their time with Brandon Presley as we wait for the results of the governor's race. Now, with only 12% of the votes in, Presley has only 41% of the total votes. However, it's still too early to call this race. A couple of key points I would like to point out is that Presley touch all 82 counties as promised in his campaign trail. Also, the independent candidate, Gwendolyn Gray, dropped out of the race and supported the potential governor, Brandon Presley. Now, Mississippi has not seen a Democratic candidate, a Democratic governor in about 20 years. So this really is too early to call for anybody's race. Reporting in the Faulkner, Jalea Daughtry, Station TV.
Thank you, Jolea. We were having some technical difficulties. We're going to try to go back to him now. Desmond, what can you tell us right now?
Yeah, well, hopefully I'm heard now. I mean, I hate to be doing all this talking and people can't hear me. I mean, I'm here at the Governor Reed's Tate Reed's watch party here at the Sheraton. And as you mentioned, Chad White is right now in the lead for the state auditor, and I just saw him come in, and he is here to support Governor Reed. Now, Governor Reed, this is nothing new for him. He has been serving in this capacity since 2012 as lieutenant governor, all the way up until 2020. Then in 2020, he took over the governor's seat. And right now, there are several people in here, his campaign team, some family, some friends, and they just are at ease right now. And right now, Governor Reed is in a slight lead, but numbers are still coming in. They're only 12% of those votes really just coming in. Slow numbers coming in from Hines County as polls just closed at 8. But we will continue to monitor those numbers. Governor Reed is expected to be talking in about the next hour. So hopefully we'll get back to you once he gets done talking with us. Reporting live in Flowood, Justin Matthews, back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Desmond and Jalea. We'll check back later for new developments during tonight's broadcast. Coming up, we'll hear more from students on campus about their thoughts on voting in this election. But first, let's hear more from our social media newsroom with integrated marketing students, Darian and Elijah. Gentlemen, what's the latest online conversation about tonight's races?
Thanks again, Wilton. We're back with more social media updates where we look at conversations surrounding the general election in the state. What are they saying, Darian?
Well, you know, a lot of followers are talking about the results that are coming in right now and voicing their concerns about a lot of things that happened before results started coming in today. You know, a lot went on, but we hope to see better. And even, you know, usually when you think of elections, you see people, you know, taking pictures with their stickers and pictures of the ballot offices, and it's really a fun moment for people to get to exercise that right. But, you know, sometimes when things happen, it kind of makes it go a little left. And, you know, if we remember, Reeves won the election in 2019 by 5% margin. So it's really interesting to see how the state now kind of can flip even more because of everything that's happened today with the Hines County situation where they had, you know, not a lot of ballots left when they had to reprint some more. So it's really interesting to see where it will go. But with Presley, we get to actually see, you know, him use his platform and his ideologies of not only just the liberal, but the conservative ideologies, and how he can sort of combine the parties together to bring more support to him. But it's kind of hard to do that in the state, you know, Mississippi, where it's naturally just conservative. So Tate Reeves is used to this battleground and used to pitching to those ideals of the people that live here. So I guess, what are your thoughts on that and how, you know, Brandon Presley can kind of get more support in that?
Well, Brandon Presley has the support of the Republicans per our social media polling, but what's a little confusing is, as you mentioned, Mississippi is a conservative state, so you take those ideology and you throw them in a party for liberals. What are we to do with that? But what we see now is what more people are saying is that how Hines County has 9 precincts that ran out of ballots, and what's a little confusing is you want people to vote in this election, but you expect this to be a huge turnout, but now you're running out of ballots. What do you want voters to do? Derek?
So, you know, I think that that's really interesting, not even just in the city level, but also on the student level, because now you have students that might be voting in Hines County as well as Jackson State, but if there's not enough ballots, well, how can they cast their vote? And that also leads to the idea of, you know, the election being harder to be fair in a sense, because now you have possibly people that can't exercise their right to vote because there aren't enough ballots. So I really, you know, you hate to see things like this because it really can change the trajectory of an election of this magnitude where every vote literally matters in a sense.
Right, and then we see that Republican Executive Committee member Pete Perry is now even considering filing a lawsuit so they can keep the polls open. It's almost alarming, as I say again, you expected this prior to the day of the election that this would be a big turnout, but now you're running out of pollings and you're getting threatened with lawsuits. And then we see further on that a judge has issued an emergency order to keep the poll places open until 8 p.m. Again, you've expected this. Why are we acting like this is something brand new to us? You wanted this to be a big turnout, and then you have a surge of not only black voters, but young black voters. So what are we to do with that?
And, you know, I think that also goes back to the fact of a lot of people really were engaged in this election this year. A lot of people wanted to go out and vote, but when things like this happen, now you have to take into account the things that can happen when you set a time, maybe you want to go vote at 4 o'clock. But now they're out of ballots and you have things to do throughout the day. So now you have to think about, if people can make it back to the polls to vote, and those votes could really be a deciding factor. So it's really interesting how, this wasn't kind of foreseen in a sense when they knew that this election was going to be really big. And you really hope that, most people took advantage of the extension, but it's not fair to say that everyone could because, like I said, life happens and people have things to do. So when stuff like this happens, you never really take account for every moment really matters until stuff like this happens.
As a young voter and just a voter, period, it's almost discouraging when you see those things happening. It's like, what do you want us to do? Wait in line, we wait in line, and we wait in line. But then who said you're not going to run out again?
Yep.
Like, how are you preparing for something like this to happen? And you have these things set in stone for us to walk into a polling place and just exercise our rights, but you're ill-prepared.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do?
And I think that's more so on the city and the state level as far as making sure that things like this don't happen again, because it really shouldn't. I mean, when you think about an election, especially an election this big where a state has a chance to make history again, it's not something that you expect to think when you're standing in line, oh, I won't be able to vote because there's no more ballots and I have to come back and hope there's still more when I come back. And I think that on a state level, this needs to be prepared, for now on. Right. Things like this shouldn't happen. And it's interesting that it happened in Hinds County when it is, 83% people of color and African Americans in the city. So it's just really interesting that this happened here and everywhere else was perfectly prepared for their large turnout of voters. So it's just something that I really think the state should really focus on, and the city just making sure that everyone has a chance to exercise their right to vote.
Right. Well, I mean, let's talk about how we're at Jackson State. We have a precinct on campus. We have a lot of students excited to exercise their right to vote, but then we're in Hinds County where the polling places are running out of ballots. So when you have these things set up like this, you're almost attacking the young voters and saying, well, we're going to give you this platform to vote, but we're going to run out of ballots over here. It's not fair and it's not cool. In lack of better words. And where we're going right now is keep on encouraging people to exercise their right to vote. If you have to stay in line, stay in line. Exercise your right and use what you have to do.
And I think that even goes back to making sure that students know that their votes matter.
Right.
So not, giving up once things like this happen, because it's sometimes a deterrence. Even in school like ourselves, you get something that happens and you're like, I don't feel like doing it anymore. But voting is very important in situations like this, not even just on a national level, but especially state, where one vote can really change everything. Everyone needs to get out and vote. And I think that things like this, when they happen, a lot of times we take for granted the necessity to still follow through with that. And this election is very big. Like, this is a very huge election for the state. So hopefully students really follow through, and even just members of the city of Jackson and people that live in Hinds County made sure that they still went out to vote with that extension from this unforeseen circumstance. So now we'll hear more from students on campus about their thoughts on voting in this election.
I feel good about voting. I feel like voting is important because it helps people decide who can be in control and who's in power.
I feel like voting is, I like that it's like a choice. At first I didn't think it was important to vote because I feel like men are going to do whatever they want to, but then I realized I have to also add and help out if I can. If I can make a change with my vote, then I hope everybody else will try as well.
I do think voting is important because we're of age that our input really matters a lot in what happens within our society.
I do think it's important. Like, even though we might not get everything we want, it's no harm in trying, so you might as well.
Honestly, I don't really think students my age really care right now. We should, of course, but I don't think they care. It's like, I feel like they're more focused on other things that are not as good as voting, because voting can turn out to be a good thing for us, but I don't think they just pay attention.
I feel like people in your generation understand the importance of voting?
No, they don't.
Why do you think that's the case?
I think they don't understand the importance of voting only because it wasn't pushed on us. And I mean, I feel like our generation don't take politics serious as they should.
Do you believe your vote can make a difference in this election?
I do.
Why?
Because as college students, I feel like we should vote and make our voices be heard.
I feel it's something we should all have the ability to do, since our ancestors fought for this, and Some has died over this, went to jail over this. So for us to not exercise that right, it's doing them a disservice. So I feel it's very important.
Being from Montgomery, Alabama, it's very important to vote. You know, we're the birthplace of the civil rights movement. We have all that history there, you know, giving us a reason to vote as the black population. Seeing the changes that we have, you know, with our current governor, it's a little sketchy. And so making sure we have someone who represents the voice of the people and making sure that it's well reflected within our community.
I feel like it's important, especially if a lot of people feel the same. A lot of people don't think that their one vote will matter, but then they don't realize there's other people who think that way. So then it's a large number of people who think, oh, my vote won't matter. Then that becomes a large sum of people who just don't go out and vote because they think that one vote doesn't matter, but then in reality it's like a lot of votes. So yeah, I think it's very important because a lot of people complain about environment and a lot of choices that affect us, but then the first people to complain would be the people that don't vote. And they don't realize that them not voting is the reason we have those people who like don't do stuff for us in office. So I think it's pretty important.
Well, not only as young people, but as young minorities, it is very important for us to vote because that's how our voices are able to get heard.
Okay, so do you feel like this generation understands the importance of voting?
I do believe so. We are Gen Z after all. We're very tech savvy. However, are they motivated to vote? I don't think so. I think that our priorities are miscued. We would rather go to kickbacks and parties versus register to vote just as our forefathers did.
I feel like voting is a very important aspect and privilege of being a citizen, and that everybody should vote. And it's a way to get your voice heard to make sure action gets done for things you want to see changed in your community.
Joining us now to discuss issues in Mississippi and how these issues impact you are Dr. Ray Michael and Mr. Jacoby Grant of the Political Science Department at Jackson State University. Dr. Michael and Mr. Grant, thank you for joining us. Before we hop into our conversation, we have some new numbers. They're calling the race in the Attorney General's race, Greta Kemp Martin, 37%, and Lynn Fitch with 63%. They're declaring Lynn Fitch the winner. In the Lieutenant Governor's race, Delbert Hosemann with 64% of the vote, with D. Ryan Grover with 36% of the vote. They're declaring Delbert Hosemann the winner in the Lieutenant Governor's race. So, gentlemen, I want to ask you guys just general thoughts off those numbers so far in those races being called really, really early right now.
That one, neither of those surprised me terribly. I mean, you know, I'd seen advertising from the Lynn Fitch's opponent, but she never had the momentum. I don't think many people, there wasn't much awareness of Delbert Hosemann's. I'd only seen ads for him. And, you know, he hasn't messed up on the job really badly. So I can see people, see him winning handily. He was he's been around a while. He's got sort of a, moderate conservative reputation, so it doesn't surprise me.
Well, the lieutenant governor's race really isn't surprising, but the attorney general's race I thought would be more competitive. Being a member of the legal community, that's a large community who typically turns out in numbers to vote. And in consideration of some of the legal issues, House Bill 1020, abortion rights, as well as the state's TANF corruption case, those were all things affiliated with the Attorney General's race that I thought would have made the race more competitive between the two.
Yeah, so it's a missed opportunity for Democrats.
I say so as well. But I think it also really highlights how informed individuals are at the polls. We see via social media a lot of attention being given to the governor's race, where there are a lot of socio-political issues to highlight. But the Attorney General's race was also one of those very important races with just as many socio-political issues that should have been highlighted and been at the forefront of voters' minds.
Absolutely, and we're going to hop into those issues within our conversation, but I want to ask this. In terms of the demographic of voters, when you look at some of the numbers coming in and some of the numbers that are already in, what do you think in your terms of the demographic of voters that have come out just based off some of these results that we're getting right now?
I haven't seen enough by county to really know what's going on there yet. you know, and have to know which one are the Democratic-leaning counties and which one are the Republican-leaning counties, which unfortunately in Mississippi pretty much tells us what the Democrats, a lot about the demographics.
Based on some of those numbers that we have right now, are there any specific counties that you may suggest or think that have been counted at this point?
I'm thinking mostly rural counties at this point. I may be wrong about that. I don't know. But, you know, that typically tends to be it. The urban counties take longer. You know, some of those in the Delta are, you know, I don't know how fast those are. Those are Democratic leaning, rural, exception to the rule really in American politics a lot. The urban counties, except for, you know, Madison and Rankin and maybe DeSoto, are, and some on the coast lean Democratic, especially Hinds County.
Absolutely.
To the professor's point, I think it's kind of hard to say with exact certainty without looking at the numbers, but just from what's come in now, I think it's safe to presume that voter turnout amongst the most important demographic, ages 18 to 30, probably is steady or didn't change as much as it needed to for Democrats to be able to actually make momentum or have momentum in the election. In comparing these numbers, especially with the gubernatorial race of the most recent one in 2019, Jim Hood and Tate Reeves. Jim Hood, where we are now, actually had more votes than Brandon Presley does, which is telling in a way. Like I said, it really, the most important conglomerate was voters ages 18 to 30. They make the biggest difference in these elections, especially here in a super red state. And based on what the numbers say now, I'd be willing to bet money and say that less than 40% of voters 18 to 30 turned out in this election.
Absolutely. And so before we get in continuing coverage of our conversation, we have some more numbers that have come in. With the Secretary of State's race, Ty Pinkins had 35.8% of the vote, and Michael Watson had 64.6% of the vote, and they've re-elected him in this particular position. So considering everything we just said, and now with the new position that we know in Mr. Michael Watson being reelected, what are some of your general thoughts on that?
He's the candidate. The Secretary of State Democrat is the one I'd heard least of. Yeah, so that one is less surprising. That's all I know how to say on that one. But yes, these Democratic Party has to support these lower races, and they haven't.
Well, this particular race, isn't surprising. If you followed it closely, Ty Pinkins was a replacement candidate. Originally, Mr. Shawaski Young was running against Michael Watson in this Secretary of State's race. And that is something that is telling as well. When you have candidates being replaced after a primary election at that,
it's a nightmare.
It's hard for them to gain momentum and traction in the race. And in this particular race, my first question that comes to mind is, did Mr. Pinkins have enough time to do sufficient campaigning? When you're running for state office, there's 82 counties in the state of Mississippi. And just appearing in those counties and actually making a difference or segue in those counties are two total different things. And when you're in a super red state running as a minority party, then the later you enter the race can actually impact the results of the race, which likely occurred here. Individuals, upon the candidate switch for the Democratic Party from Shawaski Young to Ty Pinkins, you wonder how many individuals were aware of that or were educated on the new candidate in the race. But that's one of the things that's what makes ballot education and awareness so important. Because when changes like this happens, typically the incumbent candidate is assisted or helped implicitly.
You talk about ballot issues, and I want to mention this situation. In terms of when it comes to elections and policies and things of that nature, how much would you say that partisan polarization has impacted these races just so far based off the numbers that we've gotten in?
Well, I'll refer to a quote by the great Malcolm X, who once said, "We are not outnumbered, we are outorganized." And in this particular state, a super red state, for Democrats to win, it's going to start with organization. One of the reasons the Republicans have a stronghold on this state is because they rally around each other and certain socio-political issues. And until the Democratic Party can rally groups of individuals around these socio-political issues in mass numbers and actually combat the stereotypical ideas that are common in this state, that they'll have a hard time gaining traction. We're in a state that is heavily polarized based on culture. And that's one of the things that the Democrats struggle with in this state, is finding segments of voters who don't traditionally vote for them. And that's key.
I wouldn't really, if it's like, 60, 65, 35, I don't really think of it as being polarized as at a national level where it's like close to, we've had so many close elections. It is in effect a one-party state.
Absolutely. We have more numbers in as they're coming in. State auditor's race, Larry Bradford has 37% of the vote. Shad White has 63% of the vote. They're declaring him the winner. We just talked about the state auditor's race. Then also the commissioner of insurance race, Bruce Burton with 35% of the vote, and Mike Chaney with 64% of the vote. They're declaring Mike Chaney the winner. Reaction to these numbers?
I think it goes to the polarization point. We're in a state that votes based on stereotypical culture, party ideology. All of these numbers are 60-30, about in the same range, and that's telling. What that says is Mississippi has a certain percentage of people who believe one way and a smaller percentage who believe another way. And until there's some form of assimilation, we'll continue to see this. But assimilation can only occur when one party or the other does something to create segments of people to vote in a different manner.
So when we think about that, considering the issues that are really hard-hitting to Mississippians, what are those issues, and how could those issues, like you said, those things being combated, how can that help change some things around in the state?
The issues, if you look at polling in Mississippi, Democrats should have the advantage. I mean, most of the ones that matter to people. And I know I've heard that and read that about Medicaid expansion, things over and over and over. It's the matter of selling it. And there's also, I do think there's polarization, particularly around in the cultural issues, and that's huge in Mississippi. But so much of it is race-based in Mississippi, with whites mostly voting Republican and black people mostly voting Democratic, and there's, it is not enough for just, black voters to win, for Democrats to win, if that makes sense.
I think I could agree with that to a certain extent here in Mississippi, but that
you need more than 10 to 12% of white voters.
Most definitely. But what that speaks to is the ability to educate and make individuals aware. As Professor Michaels stated, a lot of the individuals who tend to vote Republican oftentimes vote against their own interests. And that is because the decision they're making are more so based on stereotypical beliefs or cultural beliefs. And the only way that can be changed is through ballot awareness and education, understanding which parties actually stand for issues or have viewpoints that align best with utilitarian or even your best interests. One of the biggest issues here in Mississippi is you have large segments of individuals who tend to vote against their own interests. And that can only be attributed to lack of education on the candidates, what their viewpoints and standpoints are, and how that actually impacts these individuals in day-to-day life.
Dr. Michael, you mentioned the Medicaid expansion, obviously with two different candidates for governor, opposing views on that. What's your thoughts on that, and how much do you think that it had an impact or is having an impact on tonight's election?
It's, like I said, it's too early right now. It doesn't look, I wouldn't be happy with it right now as a Democrat, but you know, it's certainly what's brought all this attention to it. But you know, it remains to be seen how it comes out.
Again, it goes back to the previous issue we talked about, individuals who vote against their own interests. We have rural hospitals closing. We have metro area hospitals that are overflowing. And as you can see from the numbers, you have a large percentage of individuals who seem to disregard that issue, even though it may affect them directly or indirectly. So that being one of the biggest issues that was on the ballot. And as we analyze the numbers, yes, they aren't all the way in, but as we look at them now and where they are, it doesn't seem like those issues were reflected at the polls.
But it only came up in the governor's race. I didn't, you know, we didn't have any sort of debate with lieutenant governor or any of these down ballot things, or attorney general. Attorney general has a lot of power. Sometimes a rival to the governor in Mississippi, or has been in my lifetime.
Be the most powerful individual in the state at times.
Yeah. So, but I have heard I've had no debate and heard a little discussion about it between those two. And yeah, it's a failure of getting the message out to voters.
And so when we think about, other issues in this election, but I want to kind of tap into this, the attack ads that we saw between both candidates, more so specifically for governor. Do you think that will have an impact, specifically more so with the Tandem scandal? Do you think that will have an impact on voter turnout for?
It's hard to say. Some negative, some studies I've seen on negative advertising says that sometimes it works. People use it because it works, right? Mm-hmm. So the other is sometimes they get so nasty that people get turned off and they stay home. They stay at home. I did wonder watching the news in the last. I watched something on one of the big TV stations here where it was just a repeat of the debates and all the mudslinging, and I'm like, I can't see viewers staying tuned into that very long. So, but yeah, it depends. But sometimes people tend to use the negative advertising because it works. Look at I'm going way back on that one, but George H.W. Bush with Dukakis in the 80s. Right. It certainly worked for him then. So, but that's what I've read. Yes, it gets to a certain level of nastiness and that turns people off and they stay home.
I think it's more geographic in how it impacts races. In areas that may be more diverse, they may work to open people's eyes, but in areas that are less diverse and more culturally polarized, what it tends to do, as we can see here in Mississippi, is drive one side to its base and the other side to its base. And it tends to come away from providing the necessary education that the voters need to make informed decisions. You have individuals with these attack ads who are trying to ultimately rile up a certain conglomerate of individuals to make sure they support them, and vice versa. And that's ultimately, especially in less diverse states, is what happens. And as we can see here, what the numbers say it looks like it did is it drove Republicans to the Republican ballot box, and the Democrats who typically come out and vote to the ballot box, and one larger conglomerate is coming out on top.
Absolutely, and we're going to shift gears a little bit here. I want to bring up the issue about crime specifically in Hinds County and more so in Jackson. Obviously a big issue, not only crime in Jackson, but then also the importance of what that looks like around the Jackson State area. And when you look at the candidates that are running for, specifically in the governor's race, how do you view their viewpoints on creating change around the Jackson State area?
Well, I think as each candidate, neither one really put forth a plan or agenda to combat crime. I think that it's more so, yes, I support the police, but there's more to it than just supporting the police. You have to actually look at the socio-political issues that result in crime. And as it relates to the city of Jackson, one of the biggest things is the ability of the state government to work with the municipal government. When that happens, Crime fighting becomes easier. But when you have two governmental entities who cannot work together simply because of political division and polarization, it makes the problem with fighting crime a little more complex, because now you have two law enforcement bodies who cannot coincide and coexist and work together.
What, the Capitol Police and the
Jackson Police Department.
Yes. I actually didn't, except for him bringing up, Tate Reeves bringing up the Capitol Police, and Brandon Presley said that we also have rural crime too, rural crime problems, which is true, yes. So, but I haven't heard too much of that from, and certainly not in any of the down ballot races.
Absolutely. As we continue our coverage, we're getting other numbers. I would like to see that we have some other numbers here from the state treasurer's race. Addie Green with 37% of the vote, and David McRae with 63% of the vote, and they're declaring David McRae as the winner as state treasurer. And also we have from the latest in the governor's race, Brandon Presley with 42% of the vote, and Tate Reeves with 57% of the vote. Any reaction?
I think it goes back to the point of the attack ads. And when we compare this to the 2019 election, Jim Hood versus Tate Reeves, Brandon Presley versus Tate Reeves, Jim Hood was a more crossover candidate. He was able to tap into a segment of voters that Brandon Presley doesn't seem to be able to tap into. And that's key. And that could be for one primary reason, which would be fresh election, the difference between fresh candidates and new options. In 2019, we had both parties putting forth their candidates to seek an open office, whereas in this particular race, we have an incumbent.
Yeah.
Right. We have an incumbent candidate who's facing a new challenger. And typically, as we see in politics in general, when there's a political party who has their candidate in place, they typically rally behind their candidate to maintain power. So that was one of the issues that Brandon Presley faced that Jim Hood didn't have to face, but also which made crossing over and gaining crossover voters more important for Brandon Presley than it may have been for Jim Hood.
Absolutely.
It's still, I don't know, it may stay the same, but with 31% in, I'm still a little conflicted about being too confident in saying what's going on with the governor's race just yet. But it's the only one of the races. The others, you barely heard about them on anything, on any of the newspapers or the TV stations or anything. I couldn't believe there wasn't more, like you said, with Lynn Fitch's opponent. There's nothing.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to voter education and awareness. That is one of the most important things during election season. It's one thing to register individuals, but are these persons educated
Do they know who they're
on the
voting for?
individuals
Yes.
that are on the ballot and aware of the socio-political issues that are involved in every one of the races and just not one race particularly?
And Mississippi, honestly, has too many, to say it, we have too many cabinet things on there. Treasurer. Who the heck knows who they're voting for treasurer, right? What makes a good treasurer? But you still have to vote for that first.
It's true.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, we thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and expertise in our live election night coverage. Let's circle back to our reporters at incoming Governor Tate Reeves and Democratic candidate Brandon Presley's watch parties. Desmond, how are things looking right now?
Yeah, Wilton, we are right back here at the Sheraton for Governor Reeves' watch party. Now, I talked to several of the media members, and they say it's going to be an all-night party as we sit here and wait on those numbers to come in. Now, if you are a member of the media, you understand what that means. We're going to be here all night waiting for those numbers to come in, and we will keep you updated. But right now, Governor Reeves is at a slight advantage with 57% of the vote. I heard one of the men on the panel talk about how it just goes as a testament for Governor Reeves and how he gets his outreach. And one of the things I remember he said at his debate is that he gets to those small towns like Caledonia and Lowndes County, Mississippi. He spoke about that county in particular at the debate, and getting to those small towns may be what has given him that edge as he has 57% of the vote. I'll turn it back to you all in the studio. Reporting live, Desmond Matthews.
And Jalea, what can you tell us right now?
Wilton is not looking too good here at the Faulkner at Brandon Presley's live coverage. So we just got word that Brandon Presley is actually losing by 42% of the votes. It's still too early to call, and it is anybody's game at this moment. Reporting in the Faulkner, Jalea Daughtry, JSU TV.
Thank you, Desmond and Jalea. Right now, we have not called the governor's race. Numbers are continuing to come in, but we will continue with our coverage. This concludes our special 2023 election night coverage brought to you by the faculty, staff, and students in the Department of Journalism and Media Studies in the College of Liberal Arts at Jackson State University. Be sure to follow and engage with us on all social media platforms. I'm Wilton Jackson. Thank you for watching and have a good night.